How will the new kickoff rule change how NFL teams are built? Well, Dallas Cowboys special teams coordinator John Fassel actually talked about this, and I thought there's a lot to take away from it, especially ahead of OTAs, because John Fassel also touched on roster construction, plus some news on other Cowboys special teamers. Let's get to it. Here we go. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Primetime. I am your host, Mauricio Rodriguez, streaming with you live every Sunday and Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central, and catching up with you guys with quick-hitting videos Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. In other words, in between those live shows. Welcome, everyone, into the show. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to Primetime. Wanted to talk a little bit about special teams tonight, and that's because last week we kind of got a little bit caught up with the scheduled stuff, right? We had to cover it. We had predictions for every single one of the Cowboys games. Also, that was last Thursday night, in case you want to check that out. And I was catching up during the weekend with some of the media availability sessions, that Cowboys coaches and players, mostly coaches, had after rookie minicamp. And I think John Fassel's was one of the most insightful ones and one of the ones that really thought of something. And mostly he was naturally asked about the new kickoff rule. For those of you who have been living under a rock, just a quick refresher. The NFL kickoff is changing. So instead of having your usual run up between kicking team and receiving team and that collision at high speed in the middle of the field, they're going to line up pretty much 5 yards away from each other, and no one is going to be able to move until that kick drops and that returner has the football or the football touches the ground. So it's going to be pretty much the same as a regular kickoff, but there's not going to be basically that built-up speed from tacklers on en route to the returner. And that the hope is it's going to incentivize returns because touchbacks are going to be moved to the 30. So teams are going to want to avoid a touchback instead of, like, from a kicking point perspective, instead of aiming for the touchback, right? While you're also going to get like this different dynamic in terms of space in the play, right? Because of those penetrators that are not going to be running 100 miles per hour to tackle the returner. A lot of people have been pretty much speculating about what it's going to look like. Are teams going to get offensive linemen on the football field and try to block for the returner as if it was a running play? And John Fassel, who was one of the 3 special teams coordinators that the NFL actually chose to direct and manage this implementation of this new rule, John Fassel talked about that, and I thought it was very interesting, all that he had to say. So we're going to dive into it. Going to divide it into several aspects. But first clip is John Fassel basically downplaying the whole notion that this is going to be a very different play. John Fassel and the other special teams coordinators took this from the XFL in 2021 when they implemented this rule change. Now that it is the UFL, they kind of got rid of it, but the NFL is going to test it out for the 2024 season. And here's John Fassel explaining why he doesn't view it as a massive change, as many people would imagine. I'm going to play the audio now. You might have to adjust the volume. Here we go.
I think there's a lot of people speculating it's going to be more like an offense or defensive outside zone running play. I still feel like it's a kickoff return play, where once the ball is caught, if you're watching the NFL kickoffs from the past couple of seasons, if you just pause the tape right when the ball gets caught, the kickoff is right about where we have him with this new idea, and the kickoff return is about right where it is with this new idea. It's just the start that looks different. But once the ball's caught, it's a pretty similar play, in my opinion. And I know there's been some disagreements with that feeling that I have, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of new blocking techniques or cover techniques. It's just getting right to it a lot faster and taking all the running out. So there will be some differences, where when we're running, there's a lot more possibly weaving and avoiding and penetrating. You might not get that as much, so maybe that's why the big bodies come a little bit more into play, because you don't have the speed and the penetrators that can win, that way.
So John Fassel basically there is admitting that there's going to be a difference in body types because you're not going to have the space to go again 100 miles per hour trying to get in between blockers and try to just run through the returner. It's more likely going to be a little bit of a stalemate in several areas of the field while two players engage in contact basically 5 yards apart from each other. Like it's going to look a little bit different, but I love John Fassel being honest about this and being like, I don't really expect that much change in how the play actually looks. Now, that is one thing. And another completely, entirely different thing is going to be, does the kickoff dynamic change? And here's what I mean. The play itself, when it happens, it might look similar to a regular return. The goal, however, is to increase the number of returns. So it might look the same, but you're going to see more of them. And shout out to everyone, by the way, in the chat. Holly here makes this comment. He says, these XFL kickoffs are going to be just as boring. Here is my whole deal. I don't expect like returners to have 5 kickoff return touchdowns by the end of the season. I don't think it's going to be that big of a change. But the key numbers, and Mike McCarthy talked about these numbers, and I believe John Fassel did as well, when they were like, okay, 20% of kickoffs were returned in 2023. Can they get that up to over 50%? Was the number that John Fassel laid out, which I thought was also a part of the interesting stuff that he said. What is the NFL trying to do? Are they trying to get more kickoff return touchdowns? Are they trying to get more explosive plays on the field? Or is it just that, hey, let's have this play matter a little bit more? And if they get to 55%, which is the number that Mike McCarthy tossed out there in his press conference after rookie minicamp, then the NFL is going to consider this a massive win. Now, I don't know what the explosive rate has got to be for kickoffs to be necessarily considered fun, but you're going to have this really figured out before other NFL teams figure it out, which is going to be, I think, the most fun part about it in 2024. Early in the season, which teams are going to be the ones that really turn this into a massive game day advantage? You would hope the Cowboys are one of them, because John Fassel has been thinking more about this than most of the special teams coordinators around the NFL, because he's been working on the rule change. And add to that you've got Kevontae Turpin as your returner, who was recently a Pro Bowler and at least has had his big-time moments as well during his short career with the Cowboys. Can the Cowboys be in a position to take advantage of that early in the season more than anything else? Now, I also love hearing John Fassel being open to the possibility of him being wrong. And that was a big part of that media session availability, his willingness to admit, hey, I don't know. They can draw it up. They can pretend they know what's going to happen. But at the end of the day, they don't know what NFL teams are going to be willing to try on that football field. There might be a team that goes out there with 8 offensive linemen and tries to block up the opposing kicking team. And we'll see how that plays out. While there are others that believe that, hey, it's actually going to be the same roster construction entering game day. And one of the people that believes that is actually the very John Fassel. Here he is talking about the roster build. And then we're going to get into a handful of players, by the way, that John Fassel mentioned could get bigger roles on special teams as opposed to previous years for the Cowboys. But this is his comments first on the roster build and the whole discussion about, should our 53-man roster projections be changing because of the new rules, or will we see surprise players make the team just because of the new rule? Here's John Fassel answering that question.
But the other thing that people have disagreed with me on this, which is totally fine, because again, we don't really know, is I don't see the 48 really changing, because you're still going to dress, the same third or fourth back, the same third or fourth tight end, the same backup linebackers, because of their value as backup offensive or defensive players. And so I think I'm still going to get the same bodies, but maybe it expands, maybe like Austin Richards, as a backup offensive lineman, maybe he finds a spot on kickoff return.
I kind of think it's interesting for him to mention specifically an offensive lineman, right? Because he's basically saying, you know what? The 48 roster, which is referring to the game day roster, right? The players that are going to be active on game day. He's saying, hey, the 48-man roster is going to look the same. So the Cowboys are not going to, and NFL teams in general, they're not going to be able to carry, say, 10 offensive line or 11 offensive linemen on their 53-man roster and then have all of them be active for Sunday, right? Like that is not realistic at all. But if they go into it with 8 or 9 offensive linemen, does one of the backups see playing time? Does one of the backups maybe on the inside of the kickoff return formation just to try to seal a gap somewhere in there? Like, I thought that was massive from John Fassel, right? Like mentioning an offensive lineman. I don't think we're used to that at all in kickoff duties. But if you can see Asim Richards work in there, what is the chances that they get some other offensive linemen in there and try some stuff? Now, it's only a part of it. He also mentioned other players that could be potentially gaining special teams roles on kickoff return duties when they didn't have one earlier on. And instead of having like those players that can provide speed, maybe some players that could provide power could be a part of these plays. Here he is mentioning some of those potential guys.
Yeah, I'm talking about the blockers and the tacklers. You can see the bigger bodies maybe being a little bit more, I don't know if valuable is the right way, but Nealand or Fehoko or Chauncey Golston. Maybe you see, Schoonmaker. Maybe you see those guys on kickoff and kickoff return where they maybe didn't find their way on it because there was a speed element that maybe was lacking. But now with the power element maybe coming into play, maybe they find themselves on it.
So there you go. I had muted myself. Sorry about that. So John Fassel already mentioned Asim Richards, right? Offensive line. He mentioned Chauncey Golston. He mentioned Bilyame Fehoko, 2 defensive linemen. And there's a topic somewhere in there about what Fehoko's role is going to be in 2024. We'll maybe talk about that tomorrow night on the show. But I think that's one of the big OTA stories going into this week. He also mentioned Luke Schoonmaker. And I'm missing somebody else that he mentioned in that bundle of players, right? Marshawn Nealand, second-round draft pick for the Cowboys. The only draft pick that has yet to sign his rookie contract, by the way. Not that I would worry too much about it. But Fassel does see clearly this vision of having bigger dudes on the field when they're playing the kickoff part of it. It's going to be fun. I do think it's going to be exciting to see how that plays out in the NFL. Because listen, I have all of the respect for the XFL and the UFL and all of those leagues that are not the NFL. But at the end of the day, the top athletes are in the NFL. So, I believe that personnel decision is going to matter much more. And I believe special teams coordinators are going to absolutely obsess about how they go about it and how they match up different teams. Because that's another part of it too. Could we get into a situation where if a team is going to put only offensive linemen out there, does that impact what you do as a kicking team? And I think it's going to be an evolving sort of situation and chess match between teams throughout the entire season. So I think what we'll see in week 1 is not going to resemble exactly what we see in week 10, what we see in week 14, right? I think this is going to be changing week by week, and it's going to be exciting to watch what works, what doesn't work. But the Cowboys, they hold an advantage, in my opinion, having John Fassel leading the way, because John Fassel has been thinking about this for months now. Just to be clear, just to be clear here, because I saw this comment here from the corner of my eye. He says, Fehoko might get a cut if he cannot find his way into the rotation as a receiver. You might be thinking about Simi Fehoko, who is no longer a Cowboy. We're talking about Bilyame here. So Bilyame, and I'm not blaming you for not maybe catching this, because we didn't see Bilyame Fehoko all of his rookie season, right? Bilyame was picked in the 4th round last year, 2023 NFL draft. The interesting part about Fehoko is that he was drafted as a defensive end out of San Jose State. And we're talking about somebody who did not make the active roster once in 2023 as a rookie. Now, granted, it was a loaded defensive end room that the Cowboys had with Armstrong, Fowler, Williams, and obviously Parson and Lawrence. What were the Cowboys supposed to do, right? Now, though, going into 2024, I don't know if Fehoko is a defensive end or is he a defensive tackle, honestly. And we'll talk about that tomorrow night. But I do think that is going to be one of the most intriguing or one of the things that I just want to find out when OTAs start. And by the way, they start Tuesday, May the 21st. So we are pretty close to finding all of that out. But yeah, just to be clear, Guilherme Fehoko is the guy in question, not Simi. I don't know if I messed up the names, though, but if I did, there's my correction. Sorry about that. Anyways, Mark, shout out to you, sir. He says, what do you think the Cowboys record will be this year yourself? We had a full prediction show on Thursday night in case you want to check that out. We went game by game, but the final number that I went with was 11 wins, 6 losses. I do fear that middle stretch of the season where the Cowboys have to host Detroit, then go to San Francisco, and then have to deal with the Atlanta Falcons on the road, only to return home and deal with the Eagles and the Texans. That 5-game stretch, to me, is a little bit scary, and I could see the Cowboys walking out of there with a losing record out of those 5 games, but I do see them winning a lot of games in the back half of their 2024 regular season. So, yeah, I went with an 11-6 right there. Now, speaking of players that could be, fighting for his role on special teams to stay on the roster, blah, blah, blah. John Fassel erased any potential doubt that you might have had about the status of CJ Goodwin. I joked about this the other day on Twitter/X. I joked, this is the time of the year, and this was when I was putting together my way too early 53-man projection. I joked, this is the time of the year that I cry because I cannot figure out how to get CJ Goodwin into my projection, even though I know that he's going to make it, right? Naturally, I did find a place for him on my projection because I think he's going to make the roster. The Cowboys clearly love what they've got in CJ Goodwin. He did suffer a season-ending injury last October in that loss versus the San Francisco 49ers. He tore his sorry, man, I got rattled because I hit the microphone by accident. He tore his pectoral muscle, was out for the season. And a lot of people are wondering, yet again, if CJ is going to make the squad or not. John Fassel erased all doubts about that when he just absolutely praised Goodwin and had a strong message about him. And I actually want to read you the quote because John Fassel, man, he said, somebody is good when they are playing, but you really know how good somebody is when they're not, referring to how much they missed him when he wasn't around last year. And he continued, we felt his absence last year, not only Monday through Saturday in the meeting room, but on Sunday as well. I felt like we weren't as good on punt return because of him. Obviously, he's not returning, but he's such a critical guy taking care of the gunners on the opponent that I felt like we didn't maybe get the return started or as successful as we could have because he's so good at it. There are so many little things that come into play when you're missing a guy like that. Now, Fassel also said that sure, you have Sam Williams getting some opportunities and Jalen Tolbert and Brooks and all that being good, but he said, hey, it's good to have him back for sure. I don't perceive this as a special teams coordinator that is thinking of cutting the guy. I think we got some confirmation that CJ Goodwin is a 53-man roster member. Absolutely. And he's coming back from injury, but John Fassel made it seem like he's ready to go. He's 100%. He did say, I don't know if he's lying to me, talking about CJ there, but man, CJ Goodwin should be good to go by the time the season starts. And I believe it sounds like he's going to have a full off season actually. So that's going to be also cool to watch now that OTAs are back. And on top of this, all some more good news, just sticking with special teams for now. Brandon Aubrey is also expected to be ready to go. For those of you who don't remember, Brandon Aubrey actually had offseason surgery after the playoffs, but he's going to have a full offseason, so he's not going to lose any sort of time. So that all of that is pretty much a positive for the Cowboys on the injury front when it comes to special teams. But yeah, man, John Fassel talking about special teams got me thinking a whole lot. Now, let me get into some of your comments before we get out of here. But first, let me know in the chat. Let me know in the chat. Is the new kickoff rule going to benefit or not the Cowboys? Let me know what do you think about the whole thing. Like, do you think this is going to be an advantage for Dallas or not? I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say in the chat. Joe Gonzalez says, Mauricio, so are we anticipating more penalties due to this change? Man, that's a good question, Joe. I don't know. I really don't. Because I can see what you mean. I think some way, somehow it might lead to fewer blocks in the back. And I might be entirely off on this. I really didn't watch the XFL enough to know how it was perceived back then. But it kind of makes sense to me if you're executing fewer blocks in the backs. It might open up the room. It might open up the door for holdings, right? Like if you're engaging in these one-on-one blocks, and since you don't have that built-up speed, you're not going to be beating blockers by just running through them or past them. You're going to have to get your hands involved. That's how I would assume it's going to go down. So will that lead to more grabbing and more holding calls? It could be, but I don't know if it will be a Cowboys thing. It should be like an NFL-wide kind of thing. I just don't think it's going to be a big change one way or the other. I just think it will be more holdings than blocks in the backs now, right? But that's a good question. Shout out to Karsik calling, by the way, who said, Hola, Mauricio. What's up, Karsik? Gracias por estar aquí. Let's see, man. Let's see some of your comments here. I don't think so, Moses. Katharina talking about the Cowboys having an advantage with the new kickoff rule, so she does not buy into it. Toxic Tom says, Mo, even if it is an advantage, we would piss it away. Man, this is how Cowboys Nation is feeling right now. Isidro says it can be to our benefit because we have bones. Yeah, man. I kind of think that it's going to be an advantage because of that. And this is not me saying that, oh, Bones is better than anybody else. This is me saying Bones has been thinking about this for a long, long time. And he's being very open about the rule change, but he may be holding some of his cards close to his chest. That would be cool. Gilbert says, I think it will help the Cowboys. Let's see here. It's not going to benefit any team, says Anthony. Watch. All right. All right. In what sense, though, Anthony? In what sense is it not going to benefit them? Because it might benefit them just because of the injury thing, right? I'm interested in seeing what you mean, though, Anthony. Because I don't think the touchback rate stays the same. That is the one thing that I don't believe we see in 2024. I cannot see this rule being like, oh, yeah, it changed nothing. Like there were 20% returns last year, and it's going to be the same in 2024. I really don't think so, because that touchback being at the 30-yard line, you're going to have kickers kicking into the kicking zone. You're going to have returning teams ready to go. I think this is definitely going to be a change. The question is in favor of who, right? The kicking team, the returning team, specific teams. We'll see. Lost in Translation podcast says, watching teams set up a wall on kickoffs are lost art. He says, hey, man, remember the wedges? That was some crazy stuff right there. Toxic says, last year broke the little hope I had. Had they it all handed to us to the 2 seed, and I looked completely lost again the same way, literally purgatory, says Toxic. Man, I don't blame Cowboys fans who are still suffering for that playoff loss. Like, it was rough. It was rough. But also, I kind of feel like not talking about it in May. Isidro says it's an experiment. Mike McCarthy was asked about this, and it was a very good question. Sorry I didn't catch who was a reporter that actually made it, but McCarthy was asked, how did this impact the drafting process when you knew that the NFL rule was only for 1 year and that it might change in 2 years. And McCarthy seemed pretty confident that, hey, this is here to stay. Now, obviously, officially, it is just for 1 year. But McCarthy was like, I would be very surprised if this doesn't work the way that the NFL wants it to work. So I would assume that the Cowboys are and the NFL is going to be using this rule for several years to come, basically. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that will be it for me tonight here on the show. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. It is May. We're getting into the thick of the offseason, but we're not going to stop on primetime, man. We're going to keep seeing each other on a daily basis, live shows every Sunday and Thursday nights, and then in between, quick hitting videos Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Make sure you tune in. Make sure you hit the like button for this to reach more and more fans. Enjoy the NBA chaos this week, by the way, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your Sunday night, and I will see you tomorrow on Monday.